Hi, my name is Zenda Walker. I am the multi-award winning author of the book Zara's Wash Day. This book celebrates hairstyles of the African diaspora, and it is the first book in the Know Your Heritage series. When I say African diaspora, I mean a worldwide collection of communities descended from Native Africans or people from Africa. So you may be wondering, ooh, she spelled the word heritage wrong. Well, that was intentional. Heritage is a play on the traditional word heritage, Heritage, which means the customs, traditions, practices, and beliefs that are passed down from a predecessor or an ancestor. And so an example of a family tradition may be that no matter what's going on during the week, every Sunday, grandma cooks Sunday dinner. So everyone gathers and has a formal dinner with the family at grandma's dinner table. When I talk about heritage, I mean the hair customs, traditions, practices, and beliefs that are passed down from a predecessor or an ancestor. So an example of that is that my mother and her mother before her always set aside time on Saturdays to make sure their hair was washed, conditioned, and styled. And the reasons why my family members did our hair on Saturdays was because it was also a custom and tradition for us to attend church service the next day. So we could be at our Sunday's best, but also be prepared and set up for success for the remainder of the week. Hair has always been such an important topic in African American communities. And so today I'd like to talk a little bit more about what our heritage tells us about our heritage. I can go on and on about this topic for hours, maybe even days or weeks, but we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to focus in on 3 topics in particular. Number 1, what does our hair texture tell us about our geographical ancestry? Number 2, what do our cultural hairstyles tell us about the African American experience in America? And then lastly, let's talk about what our hairstyles communicate about where we are today and where we're going. Let's go. Afro-textured hair varies among people of the diaspora. However, there are common characteristics that our curls, coils, and kinks tell us about our link to the continent of Africa. Did you know that our hair is actually designed to protect us from the heat? The deeper melanin or pigment that typically occurs in African American hair and skin absorbs harmful UV rays and protects our cells from sun damage. Afro-textured hair grows from a more flattened follicle, which causes the strands to bend into a spiral-like shape. The curls and coils allow the outer perimeter of the hair to look dense, but Afro-textured hair tends to be less dense at the scalp, which serves as a natural cooling system in warm climates. Afro-textured hair also links us particularly to the central and western regions of Africa, which is where many of the enslaved people were captured and transported to America, South America, and the Caribbean during the transatlantic slave trade of the 16th through the 19th centuries. This also means that our hair is connected to a legacy of pre-colonial hairstyles that communicated strong messages of identity. Hairstyles and social customs of pre-colonial West Africa indicated age, wealth, ethnicity, religion, fertility, and even if a person was married or mourning. The transatlantic slave trade not only separated our African ancestors from their homeland, but the institution of slavery also attempted to erase our culture by removing and shaving our pre-colonial hairstyle. But our connection to our homeland was so strong that enslaved Africans were still able to use our hair to fight systematic oppression. Here are a few examples. Did you know that braids and cornrows actually helped the enslaved to escape slavery? Enslaved Africans used braids and cornrows to transfer messages and create maps to escape from their captors. Cornrows, which are braids that lay close to the scalp, were useful for hiding grains and seeds that sustained Africans on the slave ships along the Middle Passage. This survival tactic also sustained Africans who escaped their captors on the journey to freedom. Did you know that free Black women in Louisiana in 1786 flipped the script on a law that made it mandatory for us to cover our hair? A tignon was a type of head covering that was enacted, particularly in areas like Louisiana, as a status marker that tied Black women to the enslaved class and discouraged mixed-race marriages. But enslaved African women began to fashion their tignons as a mark of distinction by adorning and wrapping them in a decorative way, similar to the geles and dukus of West Africa. We can't forget to talk about the Black is Beautiful movement and the power of the Afro of 1960s and 70s. Once slavery was abolished in much of the world and in the U.S. in 1865, many formerly enslaved Africans felt the pressure to conform and assimilate to mainstream white society. And our hair came along for the ride. So in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, many, not all, but many African Americans went through great lengths and painful methods to straighten and achieve looks that were as close to proximity to whiteness, but also was considered fashionable in that time. By the 1960s, more and more African Americans used the hair expression to communicate resistance against segregation and systematic oppression. The 1960s afros became a symbol of a return to the natural Black aesthetic. Wearing our natural hair and even returning to the West African aesthetic of braiding and beading and even locking our hair became the iconic visual protest that defined the civil rights era. So how amazing is it that today we continue to carry on the traditions of our ancestors and celebrate our heritage stories through wearing our Fulani braids, Senegalese twists, Bantu knots, our afros, and so much more. And while there's been so much progress, we still have a ways to go. One of the ways that we can really help to continue to make sure that we're protecting our cultural styles is to support legislation like the Crown Act. Crown means creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. And so one of the things you can do is to continue to write your local senators and advocate for legislation that protects our cultural hairstyles, and also signing the petition on www.dove.com. I'm Zenda Walker, and thank you for joining me on this journey where we acknowledge, honor, and celebrate our heritage by way of Hairitage. Thank you.
Hi, I am Sheila P. Spencer, and I have some custom-made inspiration created and curated just for you. We tell our stories. We tell our stories. We tell our stories. We tell our stories. I want to share with you one of my earliest memories of stories. I didn't necessarily go to bed with childhood books or lullabies. My mother's nightly mantra was to take my hands. We would inhale, exhale together, and she would look me directly in my eyes, and she would say, Sheila, hands. Hands, a shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It is in the midst of these precious hands that your legacy, your history, your stories are found. Sheila, let me see your hands. So I didn't necessarily receive a childhood story or a nighttime lullaby. I received more of an evening blessing. It was wrapped up in love, tied up in research in the form of a history lesson. She would say, Sheila, let me see your hands. Hands, a shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It is the midst of these precious hands your history and your heritage is found. Sheila, let me see your hands, for our hands will allow us to tell our story. She would go on to say that these hands will open up books, and you will flip through and you will find these big, huge holes of missing and inaccurate Black history as you flip through the pages. That's why it's important for you to take these same hands and to write down the wisdom you hear as you sit at the feet of the sages. I want you to soak up all of the gems of wisdom that they drop on you. I want you to remember every single word that is said, Because when an elder transitions without telling their story, it's the equivalent of a library burning down full of books that have never been opened and never been read. And when the sages and the elders ask you questions, it's important that you answer them too. Because elders recognize that wisdom is most powerful when it's exchanged between generations too. Sheila, let me see your hands. Hands a shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It is in the midst of these precious hands that your legacy, your history, your story is found. Sheila, let me see your hands. We tell our story. I want you to take your hand and I want you to count the number of days in the month of February. 28 days, and every 4 years 29. I want you to take that 1 and multiply it times 12 to make it 1 year, because there's no way the vastness, the immensiveness of our story, of our legacy to 1 year can truly be confined. Sheila, let me see your hands. Hands a shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It's the midst of these precious hands. Our history, our story, our heritage is found. Sheila, let me see your hands. If you look deep into these hands, you can tell the stories. We hear the stories of your ancestors, our ancestors, ancestors who are kings and queens, ancestors who created life-changing inventions that impacted the entire world around us. Your stories, our stories, when we tell our stories, we shine light on the legacy and the brilliance that is all around us. We tell our stories. We know of ancestors who were strong enough to work in factories and fields, yet gentle enough to soothe bruised knees and skilled enough with surgeon hands to open up hearts and heal. Sheila, look at your hands. Hands a shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It's in the midst of these precious hands that our history, our story, our heritage, our legacy is found. There is power when we tell our stories. When we tell our stories. When you open up books and find these huge holes of missing and inaccurate Black history as you flip through the pages. Remember that when we tell our story, we fill in those holes and inaccuracies with the wisdom that comes down through the ages. See, we tell our stories. And she would tell me, so when you get tired and you're frustrated and you're wringing your hands and you're saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, it's at that moment that you invoke the story of Fannie Lou Hamer. I want you to remember her story, to tell her story, and I want you to be inspired. I want you to remember the wisdom of Dorothy Height, and I want you to listen. If you listen closely, you can see and you can listen to Shirley Chisholm walking down political halls of power, answering her call. I want you to listen to the wisdom of Ruby Dee. I want you to listen to the poetry of Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni, reminding us that we are royalty. I want you to remember your dream as you listen to the wisdom of Langston Hughes. I want you to remember Zora Neale Hurston as she tells you the story. I want you to listen to our rhythm. I want you to listen to our jazz. I want you to listen to our rhythm, our gospel. I want you to listen to the music of our blues. I want you to remember at these hands the shade of chocolate, caramel, amaretto, and brown. It is in the midst of these precious hands that our story, our history, our legacy is found. Sheila, let me see your hands. And one of the things that is important about telling our story is that whenever we tell our story, whenever we share our history, the entire world expands. We need to realize and remember the power and the gift that comes with the story that we can tell that's within our own hands. So I want you to remember the stories as you look through books full of missing holes, of missing and inaccurate Black history as we flip through the pages. And remember that we need to fill them in with our story, our narrative, the wisdom that comes down from our ancestors through the ages. We tell our stories. When we tell our stories, the entire world expands. When we realize the power of the story, of us telling our own story, is within our hands. So I want to encourage you to find ways that we can tell our stories. I want you to take time to discover. Discover the stories that are waiting, that are all around you. Discover the stories that are waiting within the journals of your elders. Discover the stories that are happening right now in the here and now. And once you discover the stories, I want you to encourage others to tell their stories. Encourage people to tell their stories. Encourage them to share their wisdom with you. And after we encourage, I want you to remember to inspire. After we discover the stories, after we encourage people to share, to tell our stories, it's going to inspire others to tell their own stories. And after you are inspired, I want you to remember to dream, to follow the dreams of the stories that are yet to be written. I want you to dream and remember that nothing is impossible, that the stories of our ancestors, our stories, serve as fuel for your dreams, for you to follow your dreams. And after we dream, we're called to create. If there are these huge missing holes in our story, in our Black history, we have the power to create our own narratives. We can create our own books, create our own podcasts, create our own interviews, create our own blogs, create our own websites. We have the power to create, to tell our stories. We tell our stories. Interview the sages, make it intergenerational, have someone young tell the story. And when we create, and after that, we embark on an amazing adventure of telling our stories. Remember, when we tell our story, the world expands. Remember the power of the stories that's within our own hands. We tell our stories. This is Sheila P. Spencer with custom-made inspiration curated just for you. I invite you to join me to listen and or read custom-made inspiration I have available through my blogs. Please visit me at www.sheila, Sheila P. Spencer, SPENCER.com. Again, that's www.sheilapspencer.com. I invite you to join me on Instagram, and my Instagram name is SheSpence, SHESPENC. Join me and let's go on this journey together. We tell our stories.
Hello and happy Black History Month. I'm Dr. Mo Anderson, and I've been doing Black History Month presentations for a long time. I won't say how long, but for a long time. And invariably, I get asked the same two questions. Number one, why is Black History Month in the shortest month of the year, February? And two, why do we even need Black History Month? Why do we still need it in God Bless the Great America? Well, the first question I learned the answer to a couple of years ago, and it was very surprising to me. As it turns out, in 1926, an African-American historian and educator, you know his name, Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson, launched Negro History Week to bring attention to the grossly underrepresented accomplishments of African-Americans in American history books. His concepts and the Black Studies curriculum he designed were adopted throughout the nation very quickly, but it wasn't until 50 years later, in 1976, when then President Gerald Ford made Black History Month a national observance. And while we often joke that they, whoever they is, chose the shortest month of the year to celebrate Black history, it was actually Harvard graduate Dr. Woodson who initially chose February for Negro History Week, which later became Black History Month. He wanted that specific name, that specific time, because the birthday of the former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass is February 14th. Who knew? And the birthday of our country's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, is February 12th. That's question one about the timing. Why is it the shortest month? The person who came up with Black History Month selected that month to celebrate for those reasons. But what do we say to those who ask over and over, do we really need Black History Month? We've had so many Black movers and shakers. We've had a Black president. Why do we need this? The fact is, if we eliminate this month-long celebration of African Americans' contributions to these United States of America, most people would learn next to nothing about Black history. A Newsweek article on the long shadow of slavery said, in a typical high school course in US history, slavery and Civil War are discussed for about a week, 5 45-minute classes. That isn't much. And it is the only exposure most of us get to slavery and African-American history. And I'll go one further. With the notable exceptions of Harriet Tubman, there's a really great movie out about her now, Frederick Douglass and George Washington Carver, who also deserve their own blockbuster movies, and Dr. Martin Luther King, that week, that month of Black history is the most exposure many of us get to African-American history, period. And it's much more than slavery and the Civil War. Hey, I'd like for you just for a second, think about, count the number of names and inventions and major contributions of African-Americans that you already know. And you might be thinking, I'm not in history. I don't look at life like that. I don't know many inventors of any race. But I bet you know Orville and Wilbur Wright, the guys that invented the flying machine, because I learned that in elementary school. What about Thomas Edison? He invented several electrical devices. I know you've heard that name before, right? Unless you slept all the way through junior high and high school, which some of us did. Or who could forget good old Benjamin Franklin flying his kite in the electrical storms? I bet you know more history than you think you know. But there is more to African-American history than the legions of scientists and their inventions. We've also made great contributions in music, art, medicine, architecture, literature, and education, to name but a few. And so few of us can name any person of color, not just African-Americans, born outside of the last 60 years, say, that did anything at all in these fields. Monet, Van Gogh, Mozart weren't even American, but we know so very much about them. And their work is astounding, but they're not the beginning or the end of the list when it comes to genius. Black History Month is necessary because 11 million Africans were brought to North and South America, Cuba, Jamaica, and Haiti between 1619, when the first 20 African-American slaves arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, in the mid-1800s. Even though the slave trade was outlawed in 1808, roughly 2 million slaves died during the journey, or the number would be even higher. They were not unintelligent. Many of them were bilingual. They spoke Dutch, Spanish, and French, and served as interpreters for their owners. They were resourceful and persevering, like the slave in all of the movies where they feature that really amazing slave who escapes or educates the other slaves or whatever. That is not the exception. And there wasn't just one per plantation or per movie. African Americans were doing great things long before the GOAT, Michael Jordan, hit the scene. So Black History Month is not just about slavery, nor is it a band-aid to heal the vast divide between the racial constipation of my grandparents and the racial amnesia of my children. In my mind, it's not even just about African Americans. For me, it's a reminder to the nation that U.S. spells us. And if this country is the melting pot we say it is, let's learn about all the ingredients. Let's talk about the good, the bad, the whole story of American history. And for more of my history and to connect with me online, please visit my website at drmoanderson.com. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another celebration of Black History Month. My name is Sharon Herbert. I'm a registered nurse and motivational speaker and nursing coach at Power in Nursing Innovations. And I'm here today to share with you some information about nursing and diversity in healthcare. So, our subject for today is, how does nursing diversity matter? And I'm going to take you on a short history ride. So, log in and don't forget to lock your seatbelt as we go on this journey. I'm going to share a little bit of history with you about the history of nursing. I bet you didn't know that nursing really started in about the 1700s. In England, on the battlefields, men were charged with removing those injured persons from the field. That's how it all started. Someone had to do it. And later, women started doing it in about the late 1700s or so. And we've all heard of Florence Nightingale, the mother of nursing, as she's been named. She actually was in London, and she came to the United States to serve the battlefield sites of the Civil War. And that's how we know about the beginning of nursing in the United States. Well, she went on with that for a while, and it became the rest of the 1800s where she continued with her schools of nursing. But there were no women of color or no persons of color in that school. She continued as she had been going, and it wasn't until about 1900 when my shero, Mary Eliza Mahoney, an African American woman from the Boston area, decided to enter the School of Nursing in Boston. That was a struggle for her, but she did finish by some twists of fate, and she was the first African American woman in the United States to have a certified degree as a professional nurse. Now, that was history. And it was so exciting. She got a chance to serve her community and folks that looked like her around the Boston area. And sooner or later, a few more nurses proceeded to graduate from the School of Nursing, and they started caring for persons in their area. But it wasn't long that they did that, and it took a long time to see very many patients. They didn't have, cars, and they didn't have Ubers, so it was a challenge. And the decades went on, and still there were few nurses of color serving in their communities. Well, as it goes, that took even more decades. And to about the 1960s, there were a few more African American nurses. They started their own schools of nursing and were taking care of patients. But lo and behold, that still wasn't enough to provide health services to the folks in the different, and I'll use air quotes, communities, non-white communities, who were either of a different race, a different gender identity, a different economic strategy or income strategy, a different religion, so on and so forth. They were totally different from the Florence Nightingales. So as we went on, that still became a challenge. And as we are even now just still in the COVID land, there's still a group of different communities that aren't being well served by the system. And as we go along, those persons are as different as even was 100 years ago, identified as different. And they are in places and spaces where they're not able to get the best care. They don't have hospitals or public health clinics in their area, and they may or may not have Walgreens or CVS, but they don't even have good nutrition because they don't have adequate food sources for healthy foods. So if you don't have healthy foods and you don't have health resources and there aren't any folks in your area that are looking to serve you, what happens when you have chronic illnesses? What happens when you have diabetes, heart disease, COPD, a lung disease? Yes. And then comes COVID. We have a big now group of people that are not receiving services that are available today. And that qualifies as a group or a area of folks who are qualified as having been set to be in the category of health disparities. And there's someone collecting data about that. And if you look at the numbers, you look at African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, we fall into that race bucket. And you may not be getting served. But this is the good news for you. Nurses are the greatest number of health care givers in the system. And they are coming from neighborhoods that look like yours. Their family members look like you. And we know how some of you are fearing speaking to the doctor when you go to the hospital. And we know some of the social, cultural norms for your area. So when you come and we greet you, we are always talking to you. And I think sometimes you feel more comfortable sharing or asking questions than you do with the doctors. And that's the best news for you and for the nurses, that we feel that we are able to have better communication with you. And we know that every year nurses gain the best trust from the community. So we honor and value that. And we're there for you, and you govern yourself accordingly. You talk to us like we are not strangers, and you trust us, and you give us feedback on what's going on in your home or with your toe and the fungus and the shoes that you don't have and the food that you don't have in your neighborhood, how your grandson got COVID from school. We honor that communication. And this is what I want you to do. Make a nurse your best friend. We know all of the systems in the health organization. We know how to find the social worker. We know how to find the resources. And if you have a primary care provider, we know how to find them too. We know how to help you with a plan of care for discharge. Now, if you're a diabetic and you are supposed to be on a specific diet, and we know what that is, it's the
Hello, my name is Valerie Yvette Peterson, and you never see me coming, at least not when the rain pours down on the black blood that is smeared away by the force of the white rain. But I'm on my way. You see, I've been working on this night and day, and the days seem long. All these years on the West Coast, where the white rain pours down and my blackness and my art gets cloudy when I speak of my pain. You see, my voice speaks of hurt. For when the oppressed bleeds black blood on fresh black tar, it brings to life new meaning on the block. I mean, it's the beautiful, colorful murals that are painted on the inner city streets, on my block, in my hood. You see, I've learned the art of how to fish and the art of being a painter while drowning in white waters. So why do we celebrate Black history? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he once said, "By the time we leave for work, Americans have depended on the works and the minds of Blacks." Black History Month was created to recognize and to celebrate the history of Black heritage, victories, and accomplishments. Within today's context even, this time of the year has an even greater meaning for many in this country, as the social dynamics and the political events elevate the awareness of racial and ethnic discourse. While minorities have historically been underrepresented and misrepresented in the media, we've had an enormous influence and made meaningful contributions to trends and traditions that are current today across all races and across all cultures, from music to style of dress, to poetry, to food, and to the activities of daily living. Some would argue that it is unfair to devote an entire month to Black history, as we should celebrate Black History Month throughout the entire year, and that setting aside only the 1 month gives people a legitimate excuse to neglect our past for the 11 months that are left in the year. It has also been argued about why February, being the shortest month of the year, is selected for this acknowledgement. Despite the objections, good can come from devoting a season to remembering the many geniuses who have made priceless deposits into the account of our nation's history. We can also say that with Valentine's Day, February is the month of love. And this nation would not have the foundation that it has without the works and without the love of Black excellence. Doesn't it feel good when family and friends and co-workers get together to celebrate us and our achievements? Don't we feel connected when a group of people from all areas of our lives come together to celebrate a graduation or a promotion or a holiday and a birthday? What do these celebrations do for you? And how do these celebrations truly make you feel? When we celebrate Black history, we are putting aside our opinions and we're putting aside our differences. And we take the time to actually commemorate our shared history and to take in the joy and the successes of true Black excellence. Throughout school, in order to truly learn about Black history and all of its completeness, it is generally at the point of higher education when we have to pay for this knowledge. But during the more formative years, which are generally elementary school, we're taught very specific, very strategic forms of world history and United States history. Typically, in our history textbooks, we focus on the major players and the U.S. history status quo. Typically in our history, oftentimes, they leave our lesser known figures that have accomplished even great things. And rather than letting the history books tell us who's important, we should celebrate special months like Black History Month to give us the opportunity to actually learn about other historical figures that have impacted our lives and our world. Celebrating Black history affords us the opportunities to challenge what we have learned in history, to dig deeper, and to discover actual events of the past that were taught in schools, and some that may not have been. And it allows us to learn about and to celebrate and honor Black historians. Many of these leaders endured sacrifice and suffering just so that we can live in a world that is inclusive. These Black leaders must be honored. Now, if you got a good night's sleep last night, or any night, tucked ever so gently in your bed, you can attribute that to the improved inventions of Sarah Good, who invented the folding cabinet bed. Now, when you left home this morning, or any other morning for that matter, you may not have had to worry too much about break-ins into your home, as you may have had a security system for your residence. And if so, you can attribute that to Marie Van Britten Brown, who contributed to a safer society with her invention of the first home security system, paving the way for modern home security that we use today. And even right now, having the ability to celebrate in this virtual environment and being able to not only see, but to hear one another. Although many have created improvements and revisions, Dr. James E. West, he created the electroacoustic transducer microphone. So if ever you've talked on a telephone or a cell phone, you most likely have used his invention. So the next time the question comes up about Black history and why you celebrate, and they ask you why, just tell them Black History Month does not just promote diversity, it celebrates diversity. You see, promoting diversity is bringing awareness to the idea that we are all diverse and that we all have something to contribute. But when we celebrate diversity, we are conveying the idea that our Black history is beautiful, our Black history is great, and that Black lives do always and forever will continue to matter. And this is our why. So as the African proverb says, until the lion tells its own story, the hunter will always be the hero. Celebrate our own. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on why we celebrate Black history. Feel free to find me on all of my social medias on Linktree under Valerie Yvette Peterson. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Aigné Goldsby. I'm an attorney and speaker located in Connecticut. I'm also known as the Value Coach and passionate about spreading the value vision. Value is an acronym. It stands for using your voice to advocate so others can learn and understand your excellence. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about why your Black employees don't stay. So not only are you going to understand why Black employees are leaving, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to make sure you walk away with some tips on how to avoid some of these top mistakes. But before I get started, I want to ask you a question. What do you know? I don't want you to think of this as a trick question. Think about it. What do you see when you see me? To state the obvious, I am a Black woman, but I'm more than that. I'm a skilled litigator, 300 depositions and counting. I'm also a Dallas Cowboys fan. We're not going to talk about the Niners. And I'm also known to hit a few high notes as a soprano. Now, I want to take you back to that initial question I asked you. What do you see when you see me? I am willing to bet that no one here actually knew anything that I was going to tell you, right? And it makes sense. Why would you? You don't know me. You've never met me before. The only thing you knew about me is what you could see. And sometimes that can be a problem. I can't tell you how many times I've shown up to court or to a deposition as the attorney, but I have been assumed to be anything and everything but that. It's hard. Right now in the US, less than 5% of lawyers are Black, and less than 2% of US lawyers are Black women. It's shocking, right? Listen, I'm proud to be a part of that 1.98%, but can I be honest? I am so tired. I have worked for multiple law firms and insurance companies, but a few years ago, I left my corporate job because I was tired of being the only one every time. Every trial, every deposition, every client meeting, everything. It was exhausting. I didn't want to do it anymore. But let me be clear. I didn't leave my job because I was the only one. I left what it meant to be the only one. Because being the only one or the one of few means I had a heavy load to carry and a burden I'd never asked for. And I'm not alone. It was assumed that I would want to join the firm's diversity and inclusion committee. And, one case, a firm even asked me to create a diversity plan after they started a committee and after they didn't do anything with it. And this is after I gave notice. I mean, I was shocked, but this is how things are. So this told me one thing and one thing only. They only valued me for what I could do for them. So whether that meant being a Black face on their website or spending extra time drafting diversity articles, whatever it was that they needed, that's what they wanted me to do. And it was an extra weight I didn't want to carry. So if my employer only valued me for the way that I looked and they didn't value me for me and what I actually did for my job, I wasn't going to stay. And this is not just in the legal profession. Black employees are leaving all fields because of this same unwanted burden. So I wanted to resolve this problem, and it needs to be resolved. So let's start with some of the basics here. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've all heard these words before. It's not new. And most, if not all, companies are realizing that diversity is really important to the overall success of their organization. And even if they don't, their employees and their clients are demanding it. So this is a good thing. But the problem is some of you are focusing on the wrong thing. I'm going to talk about diversity. You're hiring Black employees. You're hiring underrepresented employees. You're even creating diversity and inclusion committees and creating employee resource groups. So in your mind, you're doing all the right things. So you're asking yourself, what am I doing wrong? You're not focusing on belonging, and you're not focusing on value. So sometimes people are in such a rush to do something that they end up doing the wrong thing. Sometimes it's better to slow down and make sure you have a plan first before you start doing things. According to one poll, 46% of workers actually left their jobs because they felt unappreciated. So that's almost half. So think about it. If an employee doesn't feel valued, they're not going to stay. And it's going to be no different for a Black employee. If you only value your Black employees for their Blackness, they're not going to stay either. You have to realize that all members of your company, of your organization, and of your team is valuable. So here are 3 steps that you can take to hopefully avoid having these same issues and having your Black employees leave, just like I did. First, Don't assume your Black employees want to be involved in diversity initiatives. You have to ask them first. This also includes putting them in rooms and sometimes forcing them to have conversations where they end up being the only Black person, and so there's a spokesperson for the entire race. Number 2, don't rush the process. Diversity is multifaceted, and let's be honest, this takes time. If you're creating a culture of belonging, creating a space where your employees feel valued, you have to do it with time. And finally, number 3, don't do it alone. Make sure you hire an expert to come in and help you. If you have any more questions about this, I would love to be of service. You can reach me on my website at thevaluecoach.com, and I'll tell you all about my AVA method, which focuses on assessment, vision, and action, so that we can take your organization from being confused about diversity and losing sometimes some really great candidates, and how to change your culture to belonging and one where your employees feel valued. Thanks so much for having me, and happy Black History Month.
I'm Michael Franklin, the founder and chief thought leadership officer of Words Normalize Behavior, LLC, and I am honored for being selected to speak before you for BSN's Black History Month speaker series. I'm excited to discuss the impact of narrative power and how a speechwriter can help further your impact as a leader. After the speech, please take some time to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Instagram and Twitter at mfranklin628. Let's get started. Cooler than the other side of the pillow, the legend himself, Stuart Scott, once said, "When you get too tired to fight, lay down and rest and let somebody else fight for you." And it's advice that's vital to every part of our lives, because we cannot do everything alone, especially when we're living in a world with so much going on. Now it's more important than ever that we have folks that we can rely on, because building a community of trusted experts and supporters to take some of the weight off of our shoulders can really help build us as better leaders. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves, how will we be able to take care of others? This follows a common occurrence that many Black leaders have used throughout history in assembling what's known as a kitchen cabinet, or a group of trusted advisors and family and friends who they lean on for advice, whether it's advice strategically or simply folks to give them the reminder that they must take care of themselves. So that's why today I'm excited to make the case for you and give you 3 reasons as to why you need to bring on a speechwriter. And the case will be made in 3 key points. First is that a speechwriter can help fine-tune your voice to serve as a clearer and more impactful communicator. Secondly is that Black speechwriters in particular have been very impactful throughout history. And finally is that a speechwriter can help you build narrative power to shape a better future. A speechwriter is a necessary thought partner that can take you to the next level as a leader and as a communicator. Are you ready to rise? First, a speechwriter can help you fine-tune your voice. A speechwriter is more than a scribe or simply regurgitating your thoughts. A true speechwriter is a strategist and someone that has a commitment to leveling up your message. Because far too often we deliver and create presentations, but we always know that they can be better. Someone that we can pitch ideas off of is a role that a speechwriter can play. And across industries, most leaders actually have speechwriters. Many leaders have also served as speechwriters. Take, for example, across industries, whether you're working in corporate, whether you're working in nonprofit, whether you're working in political, entertainment, sports, you name it, there's often some sort of advisor that's able to provide that support and that recognition for developing talking points and helping ensure that you're able to make the points that you want to make as a speaker. Too often we want to do this on our own, or we're worried that someone's going to not get our voice right. And unfortunately, we've seen that impact sometimes. I know we can count the number of times that we've seen many Black leaders go on television or give a speech or a statement, and we're like, ooh, that does not sound like them. And that's not good speech writing, because when you have a speechwriter, you want to have a speechwriter that you can trust, and a speechwriter that can utilize your voice and help share your voice for what it truly and authentically can be. And that's why having a speechwriter that you're willing to work with and a speechwriter that's able to get to know you can help craft messages that are going to make you be the leader that you want to be. And when you're able to do that, it provides the opportunity to become a more impactful communicator. And only having a willingness to build a strong relationship with a trusted advisor and with a trusted speechwriter can you make that change. Secondly, when we talk about the impact of Black speechwriters throughout Black history, Black speechwriters in particular have made a transformative impact throughout our history. And even some of our world's most notable leaders started their career and started their time as a speechwriter for others. Take, for example, the first Black woman to be elected to the United States Senate from the state of Illinois, Senator Carol Moseley Braun. She actually got her start as a speechwriter writing for others before becoming a transformative leader and a trailblazing elected official. Take Stacey Abrams, who we all know for her transformative runs in Georgia, and then she later started Fair Fight and Fair Fight Action to help mobilize communities in Georgia to utilize their voice through their vote. Stacey Abrams got one of her starts working as a speechwriter for elected officials and for campaign officials in Georgia. It shows that you can be a speechwriter, but you can also be a speaker as well. And not many speechwriters hold that dichotomy in being able to do both, because some speechwriters simply like to write and not be on camera, while others like to write and in addition be on camera and see those words manifest themselves for others. There are other leaders that are not as well known as Senator Carol Moseley Braun or Stacey Abrams that also had their start in speechwriting. Take, for example, Terry Edmonds. Terry Edmonds was the first Black man to formally hold the title of speechwriter to a United States president. Terry Edmonds was the director of speechwriting for President Bill Clinton, and he was able to utilize this role, not only being HBCU educated, but to help influence and impact some of the words and statements that President Clinton was creating during his time as president. Additionally, E. Frederick Morrow, known as the first Black man to formally work in a White House during President Eisenhower's administration, didn't have the formal title of speechwriter, but some of his responsibilities sometimes were writing speeches on behalf of others. It's important to also highlight people that we may know in other writing forms and other literary focuses, such as June Jordan, the renowned poet and literature. The renowned poet and leader in literature, June Jordan was one that also took time as a speechwriter, writing for many various principles across industries and across political campaigns and across nonprofit and advocacy organizations as well. It shows that speechwriters, and especially Black speechwriters, have played a vital role in telling the stories of Black leaders, no matter what industry you're working in or what industry you're working with. And in order to learn from that history, it's important that our leaders today take charge of those actions and take the efforts to go and hire a speechwriter. Finally, the last reason for why it's so important to have a speechwriter is that a speechwriter can help you build narrative power, and narrative power is more important than ever right now. According to Nautilus magazine, narratives shape our perceptions, which in turn form our realities and end up influencing our choices and actions. Or as I say it more succinctly, words normalize behavior. What you say can influence how others act. And throughout history, we've seen the impact of narratives transforming Black communities, from the impact of the Black press and investigative journalists like Ida B. Wells to the impact of orators like the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Having a tight narrative can change the game for your impact as a leader, no matter your profession. And the words that you say can spur people to action, no matter how big of a stage or how small of a stage, whether it's internal communications with the folks that you're working with, or external communications with new folks, new audiences that you're trying to bring in and influence. It's important that you have someone that can help you make that impact and have someone that can help you manifest that power to make a difference. So take the trusted words of Stuart Scott and let somebody else fight for you. And that somebody else can be a speechwriter. Thank you so much for your time. And remember to please take some time to follow me on social media at mfranklin628 or add me on LinkedIn, because I'm Michael Franklin and I truly believe that words can normalize behavior.